Hello, my friends. So, I recently finished reading Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This book was suggested to me by a bunch of people, actually, because I started asking what contemporary fantasy novels would be appealing to someone who's a bit of a literary snob, which I admit that I am. In fact, I don't actually though I'm a fantasy writer, I don't actually read a whole lot of fantasy. So, and I know that I need to change that. So I asked some people what they thought a somewhat literary snob would like to read in the world of fantasy fiction today, and Robin Hobb came highly recommended. So I decided to read Robin Hobb, and yeah, this was my introduction to Robin Hobb, and I liked it. I'm going to tell you the things that I didn't like about it so much, things that I liked about it. Um, typically, and like I said, I don't read fantasy enough. Typically like Milton, um, Dostoevsky, Steinbeck, and like that's my jam. But I do enjoy a good fiction novel. I really do. And my wife has gotten me reading Sanderson. I have been reading Sanderson, and it's actually kind of Sanderson's gotten so big that it's kind of gotten cliche to say, oh, I like Sanderson. Well, of course you like Sanderson. Everybody likes Sanderson now. But I do like Sanderson, and Hobb. I've decided that I like Hobb, and I'm gonna keep reading her stuff. But so here we go. I'm gonna give you some of the details that well, not details, but some of my thoughts that I had on the book. So great character development. You get this character from when he's very young. He starts from his earliest memories, and it goes through his childhood and his adolescence. It and Hobb, I think she does a great job of grasping youth, of showing what a young boy would would act like and would feel like in this given environment. Um, of course, the flip side of that, the fact that she does so well with character development, she really fleshes out, especially the main character, but some of the other characters as well, like Burrick and some of the others, is that it's a bit tedious. It's kind of slow in the beginning. It's slow for a lot of the book actually, but it's good. It's I've seen books that were slow without really doing character development very well, but she does really well. And I tend to be patient with things like that. I don't, even though I try to write fast paced stuff, like definitely Wild River is written to be a fast paced novel, but even though I try to write that way, I often enjoy stuff that's a little more slow paced. That wasn't that big of a deal to me. Um, sh- Her world that she creates is very real feeling. You can tell that she knows a lot about medieval life. She's studied about it a lot. She has a good grasp of what it was like living in a medieval village or town, or particularly living in a medieval castle, as you see that from the perspective of someone who's kind of in a mid-level position in a medieval castle, and I think that her portrayal feels very accurate to what it would have been like. She also understands. You can tell that she understands medieval intrigue and politics very well. How royals would have acted, what they would have been concerned with, they would have interacted with each other, the moral questions that they faced, the common problems that they faced, things like that. I think Robin Hobb has a very good grasp of that, and you can see that in the novel. Her magic, something that I really like. Her magic in the book feels very natural, and it feels very much like it's a part of the world. Like there's a mystery to it, but there's also an order to it. And it's in this way, it's not so different from so many other natural forces that people in a medieval society would have encountered, where they would have seen a certain order there, but they wouldn't have necessarily understood it at all. Like they look at the stars moving about in this orderly fashion and not really like they don't know anything about the theory of gravity and all that. They just know that there's a certain order to what's happening, and they understand it to some extent, but it's a mystery to some extent. And that's how she portrays magic, and I like that, and it feels like a very real part of this world. You feel that it does have limitations. It does have rules. You're not entirely sure what all those rules and limitations are, but they are there. And it's when the magic happens, it's something that just kind of touches on reality a bit, and it doesn't overwhelm the story. There's this tendency to want to just, when we have magic in fantasy, we tend to want to just have a wizard come in and shoot everyone with lightning bolts and everything, and it's not this overbearing thing in the narrative. It's a little bit subtle, but still powerful, and I like that. Um, she has in the story you also see there's a great grasp of moral complexities, especially moral complexities that would be associated with court intrigue, things like that, and running a country. Um, the main character is training to be an assassin, and there's really no nice way of being an assassin, and intrinsically that's going to be a job where you're going to be asked to do some very unsavory things. Even if you don't like certain people, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to like the idea of killing them, right? But this character is being trained to become an assassin and to be the king's man, and go and kill people when it's necessary for the crown. And I think that the story handles that very well. Um, but see, I think that a lot of time when authors try to get into moral complexities, they run the risk of making their story too dark and too cynical. And I don't feel that at all from Hobb. You still very much like the main character, and you like a lot of the other characters, even though there's a cynicism there, even though you deal with some dark things. There's still this general positive feeling toward the main character, and toward others, and so I like that. I like how the story maintains that. Um, there are some aspects of the story that are kind of terrifying, in a good way. It makes it interesting. You have the people who are forged, and they are. I'm not going to give too many details on the story. The people who basically lose their humanity, and they're scary. Um, but and I'm going to start getting into some of the weaknesses of the story here. Even though the forged people are conceptually scary, conceptually terrifying, the thought of them is very, very frightening. You don't really see it all that directly. And now, see, that's a fine line to walk, because on the one hand, I don't like really graphic stuff. Like, that's why I tend to not really like zombie fiction that much, because it tends to be intrinsically very graphic and gory and everything. And Hobb doesn't get into that. This is not a graphic story. So I like that, but I think the story doesn't. It errs a little too much on the side of leaving things unshown, to the point where you have this idea of the forged as this terrifying thing, but you don't really see them enough and feel them enough to develop this visceral feeling toward them. So that terror, it doesn't ever become really tactile. It's kind of a distant thing. Then you have the fact that the story doesn't really have a villain. It kind of does. It has multiple villains, but not a really a good story needs a really strong, compelling villain most of the time. And I tried to write compelling villains. I like villains. Like I said, I like Milton. I love how in Paradise Lost, Satan is this very charismatic character, and I like seeing villains like that. You don't really see that in this book, and it's okay. Like I said, I still like the story, but like you have the Red Ship Raiders. They're definitely the enemy, but again, they're like the Forge, even more so than the Forge. They're very distant. Like these attacks are happening along the coast. These raiders are coming and attacking people, killing people, stealing things, but you don't ever get like a really detailed account of characters encountering them. It's always just kind of the receiving news about the raiders. They aren't really depicted. Maybe I assume that you're going to see more of them in later books in the series, But in this book, you don't really see much of them. You just hear about them, and so they're very distant. And so you don't, in that sense, they don't really make a good villain because they hardly make a villain at all because they're just kind of this threat that's looming over the heads of the characters, but you don't ever actually see them very much. Then there are other villains. I'm not going to name them because it's supposed to kind of be a surprise who these other villains are, but I wasn't really surprised. I like there are two main people who become villains, and I was just like, yeah, it was obvious that was going to happen for both of them. I wasn't really surprised at all, and they're both kind of like you don't get the sense of like, oh wow, this guy's an evil mastermind, and you don't really get the sense that they're all that charismatic either. Um, they're not really compelling in that way. You just don't really like either of them from the beginning, and they they do some bad things, and they face certain consequences for that. Um, and the good guys make the best of life, uh, in spite of what the bad guys have done. And I don't want to give away too much from the story. So, like, yeah, if one of there are two main things I guess that I would say negative about the story. One, it's a little bit tedious. Takes a while to really get into any action. And number two, it's lacking a compelling villain. Like there isn't really a very compelling villain there. But despite that, I really like the book. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think it is a really good beginning to a series and to Robin Hobb's world. And I'm pretty sure that the things that I've said that I didn't like so much about this book probably won't apply to her other books in this series. So yeah, I would say, um, unless these things I've mentioned really bother you most of the time, if you like fantasy, you should probably pick it up. It's really good. It's a very down to earth kind of fantasy, and it has compelling characters, even though it doesn't have a compelling villain. So yeah, tell me what you thought about the book if you've read it. If you hated it, if you liked it a lot more than me, either way, that's great. I want to know. Tell me what fantasy book you think I should read next. Right? Um, and yeah, any other thoughts, any other questions, anything else you want me to talk about in my videos, just leave them in the comments. And I will see you folks later. And Merry Christmas! Again, Merry Christmas. I already said that, but again, Merry Christmas.